These artifacts, who do they belong to?
They belong to the museums where they are now, because there are laws, And if even for the artifacts which were looted in the 19th century, the war, there was laws, and the looting of war was legal.
Hello everybody, welcome once again to our channel. I hope wherever you're watching us from, you're having a great time. Now, during the quest to colonize Africa, European countries engaged in different schemes. And one of them was capturing all artifacts that were there in Africa and taking them to their countries. Right now, if you check, you will find that most of the museums in Europe have artifacts that were stolen from Africa. And this is really disrespectful to the continent because some of the things that are held with high regard in Africa are being used in these European countries to gain money and to really boost their revenues. Yet in Africa, these things cannot really get back. This is a very, very serious question that has been asked by many people. I came across a clip here that has really made me ask myself a lot of questions. What level of contempt does this European treat Africans? I want you to listen to this video. It is an interview that took place some time back, but it remains very relevant to date. Watch it, then let's come back and share some thoughts together.
Yeah, the question put there by that art collector. These artifacts, who do they belong to?
They belong to the museums where they are now, because there are laws, And if even for the artifacts which were looted in the 19th century, the war, there was laws, and the looting of war was legal. Maybe it's not moral, but it's legal. And if you want to come back on this, why don't you come back 19th century, 17th century, 16th century? You cannot stop. You don't know where to stop.
At the time, they weren't independent countries.
Yes.
So, of course, the colonial power can decide to take stuff. I mean, it is looting, isn't it?
No. It is looting, yes. Part of it was looting. But if you have read the report, I did read the report in English because I didn't get the French version. And the report says it's not only the war looting which must be returned, but everything. The scientific expeditions where they collected artifacts, they must give it back. The gifts from the colonial administration, you must give it back. Actually, you are going to give back to some countries, and they are not reclaiming it because it's only the Benin which reclaim the artifacts, not the other ones.
Only Benin is claiming it.
Yes.
And that raises the other question, which is a delicate one. You heard in that report,
yes,
the Beninois scholar there,
yes,
Ms. Zanzou,
yes, I know
saying, how do we get African kids to see their own artifacts?
Yes, you can do this. I think I milite for cooperation between French museums and Africa to organize exhibitions of art, African art. You can organize exhibitions permanently.
And how does that go? Because there's the question of
yes,
the pieces when they travel around Africa. Does it go okay?
Yes, it's okay to send them to Africa, but they must return to the French museums where they belong.
So why is there this promise from Emmanuel Macron?
I don't know. You must ask him. But I think he was like a witch who doesn't know what he does, But because he says we are going to give it back, as if these artifacts it doesn't belong to anyone but the French museums. And it's very interesting because we saw an example in Senegal, I think it was a museum in Senegal. In Senegal, you have a museum, Haïfa Museum, which has in its collections many works of art from many other countries from Africa, and it was a collection built during the colonial era. Are they going to give it back to the other countries, this museum in Senegal? I don't think so.
Many people watching this, maybe they don't know Africa very well, but they do know the Elgin marbles
yes,
that Greece has been asking
sure,
from Britain
yes,
since the last century. So what's the difference between Greece asking for its artifacts back and what's going on in Africa?
I do not see any difference. The report says it's not the same. The report says it's only about sub-Saharan Africa, because they say 90% of art is outside. This number, I don't know where it comes from, and even in the report, they say they don't know where it comes from. But even if it's true, we must help African countries to exhibit works of art. We must lend them to Africa. So there is no difference between Elgin marbles and this. There is no difference with anything. So all the artifacts which were taken in Greece must be returned, in Egypt must be returned, in Algeria must be returned. It's the beginning of something you don't know where it's going to go.
But if they were stolen...
No, they were not stolen. It was looting, yes, but there were law.
I don't get this distinction between looting and stealing.
No, it was stolen if you want, but in the 19th century, in the 18th century, in the 17th century, during all the wars, art was stolen. So we must give back everything or nothing. And more of this, these works of art, when they were taken, if they were not taken, they would have disappeared, because many of artifacts, African artifacts, are made of wood, and wood it was not made to be kept, you know, so it would have disappeared. They became works of art in museums because Europeans said it's art, you know. It's not from Africa. It was not art. It was meant to disappear. Right.
These artifacts who, would have disappeared in the past,
yes,
but don't anymore. That brings us to another question,
yes,
which is, you talked about exhibiting more of these works in Africa.
Yes.
What do you do to help African countries to have proper museums that are with the proper funding so that they can keep things climate controlled and to preserve the works when they go over there? What needs to be done?
They need advice from people who know what is a museum, who know to build them. So we know this and we can help them to do this. And even in the report, they say that there are 500 museums in Africa. Maybe. So maybe there are already museums which can conserve these works of art. But we must help them. There are much money from France to Africa, and it's good for helping Africa. Maybe part of this money...
I was going to say, Didier, because you were on a panel here where you were very critical when there was the opening of the Louvre in Abu Dhabi,
yes,
saying France's cultural diplomacy was misguided. What can the French government do specifically when it comes in this regard? Should they be devoting more energy to Africa to help them?
They can help Africa. I don't see why they could not help Africa when they are renting their collections to Abu Dhabi, you know, because Abu Dhabi has money and Africa has less money. I think we must help Africa. It's not the point. The point is we must not return art which actually doesn't belong to them.
All right, Didier Rykner.
I'm sorry for this, but it's just the law, actually.
Now, that is the mindset of those who claim to be civilized. If you're African and this does not anger you, then you have a high tolerance level. And for me, I think all this is unfair, a total unfair treatment of Africa and African people. This gives you the level of contempt that these white people take and think of us. They think that we cannot preserve our things. When the guy is asked about how African children can access and see their artifacts, he is saying that France can lend them to the specific African countries that want, and then they be returned. So for them, they think that the activity of looting that took place was right. It was not stealing, but it was looting that was allowed by law. So it seems that during the colonial era, the mantra of the white person was that they come to Africa, anything they find, they can easily take it. And I did a little research. Here is what I found out. The call for France to return artifacts stolen from Africa is a crucial issue that is rooted in historical injustice, cultural restitution, and ethical responsibility. This movement reflects a broader global recognition of injustices of colonialism and the ongoing impact of these historical wrongs. Firstly, the return of African artifacts is a matter of historical justice. During the colonial period, many African artifacts were taken under coercive or exploitative circumstances. European powers, including France, acquired these cultural treasures through means that often involve significant power imbalance and little regard for the rights or wishes of the local populations. The repatriation of these artifacts is essential to correcting historical injustices and acknowledging the wrongs committed during the colonial era. It helps address the legacy of exploitation and contributes to the healing process for affected families. So, repatriation of these artifacts is the only just way of kind of addressing the issues that happened historically. How on earth do they come, take our artifacts, put them in their museums, earn revenues from them, and then claim that Africa does not have a right over them? This gives you the clear blueprint of how the white people or the Europeans operated in Africa. They didn't want anything positive for Africa. Don't even think the education that they brought here is going to help us. It was meant to remove us from our cultural practices and cultural beliefs. So this is an issue that is quite serious and must be addressed. They must repatriate all the artifacts that they took from us. Secondly, returning artifacts is an act of cultural restitution. African artifacts are not mere objects, but integral parts of cultural heritage and identity. They hold significant spiritual, historical, and social value for the communities from which they originate. The continued presence of these artifacts in foreign museums or private collections often undermine their cultural significance and prevent their proper contextualization and use. By returning them, France would help restore these artifacts to their rightful cultural contexts, allowing African communities to reclaim and preserve their heritage. I think this is a salient point that we must talk about. These artifacts hold spiritual and cultural heritage for African people. They are the source and depiction of the religion that African people believed in. So it is just fair for all people to really get what is theirs and return all the artifacts to the continent. We need them back, and France and any other country that holds these artifacts must be ready to return them without any condition, because these things were stolen from us. And if it were to be a court system, anybody who steals something must be surcharged. So they must even pay us because they have gained and earned revenue from these artifacts. Ethical responsibility also plays a key role in this issue. The acquisition of many artifacts was part of a broader colonial practice that was ethnically and morally problematic. France, along with the former colonial powers, has a responsibility to rectify these historical wrongs. Returning the artifacts is an important step in acknowledging and taking responsibility for the negative impacts of colonialism. It demonstrates a commitment to ethical principles and respect for the cultural rights of others. Furthermore, the process of repatriation can foster better international relationship and cultural diplomacy. By addressing the historical grievances of African people, France can build stronger, more respectful relationships based on mutual understanding and cooperation. This act of goodwill can also set a precedent for other countries with similar colonial legacies, encouraging a more just and equitable global cultural landscape. I think this is something that is quite profound. If this repatriation happens, Africa will have its respect, and it will also respect those other countries. But one thing here we must talk about. We have seen in recent times many African countries going to the east, building new alliances with China, even talking to Russia for funding and also for trade deals. This tells you where Africa is looking at. For many years, the Western nations have taken advantage of our continent, and African leaders have come of age, and they are able to discern the disadvantages of working together with these Western nations. And that is why, instead of going back to their colonizers, they are looking to other avenues where they can have more mutually beneficial engagement and respectful engagements with these countries. In summary, France must return artifacts stolen from Africa as a means of historical justice, cultural restitution, and ethical responsibility. The action acknowledges past wrongs, respects the cultural significance of these artifacts, and demonstrates a commitment to rectifying the injustices of colonialism. It is quite despicable that to date, we are still talking about effects of colonialism without even those who perpetuated this kind of injustices ready to own up to their mistakes and do what is necessary to atone for their sins. I think as Africans, we must wake up and know that they've got no respect for us. We as a people must wake up and demand this respect for ourselves. Tell me down in the comment section what you think about this topic. And if you're watching us for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and also share. Thank you, and may the good Lord bless you. Goodbye.